the far future, in the shadows of a galaxy ruled by silence and war, there are things even the Imperium dares not remember. There were once 20 Primarchs, demigods born of the Emperor's will, each forged to lead legions, each raised to conquer the stars. 18 still echo in stories told by warriors and priests, but 2 are missing. Not fallen, not martyred, simply gone. Official histories say little. The names are scratched from records. Statues stand without faces. Old maps are missing star systems. Yet rumors persist in the quiet between transmissions. Forgotten logbooks surface. Nightmares bleed into waking hours aboard long-lost ships. This story is not about war, not about heroes. It is about what was hidden. It is about memory that resists death. And it begins not with a battle, but with a whisper, deep inside a derelict archive station, where a lone voice begins to speak, not to inform, not to warn, but to confess. Now let us begin. He kneeled before the altar of a forgotten name, and the stars blinked, as if they too could no longer recall his face. The voice that follows is not clear. The audio has been damaged by time, and perhaps something more. But within the static and whispering dust of data rot, a story begins to form. One not told in books. One not meant to be heard at all. A single remembrance's voice speaks from a dark place. He is tired. His breath catches sometimes. It sounds like he's been speaking to himself for hours, or maybe years. Yet the tone never rises above a whisper. He names no location outright. He does not mention the Emperor, or the heresy, or the 2 Primarchs who were never listed. But the silence around his words says enough. The message was never supposed to exist, yet it plays. Somewhere deep in the void, the transmission still repeats, waiting for someone to listen. The first time I saw the planet, I didn't know its name. None of the logs matched the coordinates. Imperial charts showed nothing, but it was there, hanging beyond the edge of the known systems like a secret that never wanted to be found. We came on a research mission, a small crew, not military, not mechanicus. Just a few of us from the historical division, sent by the Ordo to map and record sites marked as unverified during the Great Crusade. Our ship was called the Rex Anima, an old survey vessel with half-functioning sensors and a chapel that hadn't been blessed since M36. I was the remembrancer. My job was to take notes, archive data, and speak where others wouldn't. I was chosen because I had no known psychic markers, no deep oaths, no family line that traced back to any legion. That was important. The Ordo said it had to be someone unconnected. The approach was smooth at first, no warp storms, no signals, just silence. We knew something was strange when the ship's pic recorder failed to record visual data. Not a system glitch, not static, just absence. The star near the planet gave off no measurable light, and yet we saw it with our eyes. A pale sphere with deep cracks like a glass globe left too long in the cold. Every system marked it as a void anomaly. Every scanner said we were looking at nothing. Still, we saw it. I remember the way the captain shifted in his seat. He was a quiet man, a former naval officer from the Scourge campaigns. His name was Elian Varn. He didn't like myths. He hated anything that hinted at unsanctioned superstition, as he called it. But even he paused before giving the order to descend. I asked him if we had clearance. He said nothing. Then he reached under the console and turned off the Vox. We went down in the smaller lander, just 5 of us. Varn, myself, the Vox Tech Isala, the Mechanicus Observer Codex Theta, and young Marek, the junior scribe. He was no older than 20 standard. His eyes always wandered when he thought no one was watching. The descent was quiet, not in a peaceful way, more like being inside something that didn't want us there. The clouds didn't move. They just hung in the sky like stained parchment. And the light, if you could call it that, was soft but cold, as if the sun above had never burned but only remembered warmth. The moment the lander touched down, I felt it. Not in my body, not in the air, in memory. It was like standing in a place I had visited once, long ago, but had no memory of going. A false dream I had never dreamed. I looked around. The planet was barren, no ruins, no signs of war, but there were foundations, flat stones arranged in wide rings, and in the center of each was a broken column, too smooth for erosion, too deliberate for nature. They were shaped like altars, but there were no symbols, no script, no offerings, just silence. Isala tried to raise the ship. No response. Codex Theta moved to examine the ground. He said the stone wasn't natural. He called it star-wrought, a material found only in deep core forge worlds. He paused, scanning with his mechadendrites, then turned his head and said something that chilled us all. This architecture predates known Imperial construction by at least 10 millennia. Varn stared at the horizon. He didn't argue. Marek wandered too far from the group. He stopped near one of the columns. I called to him. He didn't answer. When I reached him, he was whispering. I asked what he was saying. He looked confused. I wasn't talking, he said, but I had heard it, clear. A name spoken without sound, a name that shouldn't exist. That was the first time I saw the symbols. Not carved, not painted. The stone itself seemed to shift when you looked too long. The lines formed something like a sigil, but it faded the moment you blinked. I tried to sketch it. The ink turned grey, the page soaked with cold moisture that hadn't been there before. Varn called us back. We leave in 2 hours, he said. Take what you can. Codex Theta protested. He said the readings were unstable but not dangerous, that this was the most intact structure he'd seen outside of Mars Prime. Varn stared at him for a long time. 2 hours, he repeated. I spent mine walking the edge of the ruins. I kept thinking I'd find a marking, an inscription, a date. Instead, I found a grave. It wasn't marked as such, but I knew it was. It was a small mound of stone arranged in a perfect triangle. On top, a sliver of gold, shaped like a sunburst with 2 missing rays. Just enough space for 2 figures. 2 that had been removed, not broken, not erased, left blank, as if no one had ever wanted to name them. Marek found something else. A data slate. It was old, worn, partially melted, but it powered on when he touched it. No command words, no encryption, just one file. A single line of text. They were not lost. They were unfound. That night we stayed aboard the lander. No one slept. The wind outside didn't move, but we heard it anyway, like whispers through sealed hulls, like prayer. I recorded everything, not because I thought it would be needed, but because I felt we wouldn't be allowed to remember. Varn changed after that. He spoke less. His eyes looked beyond the walls. Marek stopped eating. Isala stopped trying to fix the Vox. Codex Theta recorded the symbols on the column but refused to share them. He said they belonged to something unfinished, something that never made it into the books. And I kept writing, even though I knew I was only writing for myself. There was no mission, no official log. We weren't meant to be here, and yet, we were already part of it. We left the surface before sunrise, if the word even applied here. The sky didn't change. The pale, bruised light stayed the same, the kind that never shifted, like it was caught between days. Everything above felt paused, as if it waited for someone or something to wake it. Varn didn't say anything when we boarded the lander. He walked to the console, keyed the sequence, and began ascent. No words, no orders. He didn't even look back once, not at the surface, not at the others, just forward. but he didn't take us back to the ship. He changed the course, entered coordinates no one recognized. They weren't in the mission file. They weren't part of any known sector map. We landed near what looked like a broken relay tower, an astropathic node. Its base was buried in a lake of black glass. The glass didn't shine with the sun. It glowed from inside. A soft pulse like veins under skin, cold and quiet. We stepped onto the surface. No sound, no footsteps. Our boots left no print, no texture to the ground. Just smooth crystal, like walking across frozen breath. The relay didn't hum, didn't signal, but the moment we stepped inside, our Vox units flickered to life. No command, no code. They shifted to a channel none of us had tuned in centuries, one not listed in active archives. A lost frequency, still alive. It had been silent for 5,000 years. Inside the relay, everything was clean. Seats intact, walls smooth, consoles dark but unbroken. The air was cold but breathable, not sterile, not decayed, just still. Then we saw him. In the center, where the choir throne stood, someone sat, wrapped in faded robes, astropathic design. The bones beneath looked too whole to be dead, too rigid to be living. He didn't move, didn't react, but something around him moved with rhythm. A warp current, small, slow, but steady, like a pulse. Codex Theta ran a sweep, confirmed psychic residue, residual but active, not a ghost, not a presence, a trace left in place, still singing. Marek knelt, said nothing, just stared. I stepped closer. The man's face was covered in paint. Not fresh, not tribal, not ritualistic in the usual sense. Old lines, dried out, drawn around his eyes and lips. Circles overlapping arrows. Crosses that bled into spirals. Symbols I'd never seen but somehow knew. I reached out. My hand passed through the edge of the field. That was when the vision began. It didn't arrive like a dream. It wasn't a flash of memory or a spoken word. It was like looking at a painting stretched across time, made not from pigment but thought, a psychic mural trapped in warp signature, still glowing inside the throne. A figure stood between two shattered statues. He was tall. His armor wasn't damaged by war, but by time. The cracks were from abandonment. His hands chained to a column of light. His head lowered not from defeat, but from acceptance. His face was strange, not familiar in the normal way, but I had seen it. In moments of sleep I never remembered, in places my memory avoided. Behind him stood another figure, taller, cloaked, no face beneath the hood, just a space. In one hand a blade that dripped silver dust. Each drop dissolved before it reached the ground. Then the mural vanished. I gasped, fell back, my head throbbed. Marek caught me. He held my shoulders with a grip that was too cold, too steady. He leaned close and asked, "Did you see them?" I nodded. He didn't smile. He didn't speak again. Codex Theta began to record. His voice was lower than usual, flat but distant, like he wasn't speaking to us, like he was translating something not meant for words. He repeated a single term, Auric. It didn't mean anything, not in Low Gothic, not in High, not in any known dialect, but the sound of it lingered, as if the word had weight without language. He etched it into the wall using his mechadendrites. The metal scraped across the relay panel. The ink ran, not like fluid, like memory. Then the Vox crackled. Isala's voice came through. She had tapped into the internal relay logs, said she found an active feed buried deep. Buried but not broken. She played it. The lander's speaker filled with sound, not speech, not music, just layers of low tones, a slow chant, each tone stacked over the last, no rhythm, no break, like waves folding into each other. Then a whisper came through, only 5 words. He waits between the names. It played 3 times. Then the signal cut. Varn stood by the entrance. He looked at all of us, then at the choir throne. He reached into his coat, pulled a charge from his belt. A small explosive, not enough to destroy the relay, just enough to fracture the psychic field. He placed it on the floor, set the timer. Codex Theta raised one hand in protest, barely moved it. Varn spoke almost gently. This wasn't supposed to be found. Then he walked away. None of us followed right away. We just stood there, listening to the timer blink. Outside, the air felt colder. The wind didn't move, but the sky did. The clouds swirled in a slow spiral that had no center. On the way back to the lander, Marek spoke. Not to anyone in particular, just loud enough to be heard. Why would they leave it active for 5,000 years? He wasn't asking about time. He was asking about purpose. I didn't have an answer. The ship met us in orbit. The Rex Anima had not moved. It hovered in silent rotation, untouched by storms. The docking clamps received us without delay, but something had changed. A single message had entered the logs while we were on the surface. One signal, no source, no return path, no language markers. Just one sentence. The choir still sings, but not for you. Varn deleted the entry. He didn't report it. He didn't explain. He turned to Isala and told her to erase all relay records from the ship's drive. She didn't reply. I passed her cabin later that cycle. Heard something inside. Not a voice, chanting, not words. Just sound, a slow pattern, like someone humming a melody they couldn't remember. She sat facing the wall. Her lips moved, but she didn't breathe. Marek, or the archivist, as he now called himself, was in the chapel again, drawing the symbol, the sunburst. 2 rays missing, one bent outward, one erased completely. He placed it above the altar this time. He didn't pray, just stared at it. Varn entered, saw it. He didn't remove it. He stood in the doorway, watched. The next cycle we left orbit. No one gave the order, no one announced it. We just left. And as soon as the ship cleared range, the planet vanished from our scanner, like it had never existed. But I knew it had. We all did. Because the worst truths aren't hidden by lies. They're hidden by memory. And the memory was still here, in us. Even after we had been told not to remember. After the relay, nothing returned to normal. We tried, logged our hours, ran sensor sweeps, maintained air recycling, monitored the void. But it felt like we were only pretending. The ship still worked, but something inside it had gone quiet. Something old, something watching. The halls were colder now, not in temperature, in mood. When we walked, our footsteps echoed longer than they should have. Light no longer arrived instantly. It faded in slow, like memory, returning after too much time in the dark. Codex Theta withdrew further. He stopped answering questions. If spoken to, he would turn his head, but his eyes didn't follow. He moved between the data vault and the chapel without rest. I saw him standing in front of the altar once, just watching, not praying, just staring like he was waiting for a response from stone. The servitors kept away. Even the automated ones rerouted their paths to avoid him. That had never happened before. Marek stopped using his name. He started calling himself archivist. Every time I addressed him, he corrected me. At first, Varn said it was stress, but it became constant. Even in his log entries, no Marek, no rank, no birth world, just archivist. When I asked why, he told me names didn't belong to people anymore. They belonged to memory. I tried confronting him, thought if I just spoke plainly, it would break through whatever veil had fallen over him. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile I knew. His face held no warmth. His eyes didn't follow meaning. His words were slow, like he was hearing them at the same time I did. I asked him where he grew up. He paused for too long, then answered, "My homeworld was made of dust and stone. Its name has been folded." I asked what he meant. He placed a hand on my shoulder. His fingers were cold, his voice quiet. "The ones who came before us were not erased," he said. "They were replaced." He walked away after that. That cycle, I checked the main archives. Marek's file hadn't been erased. It had been rewritten. His face was still there, same expression, same photo, but the name was missing. Not blurred, not redacted, just gone, as if it had never existed. Only one field remained: Unknown Legion. I sat with that line longer than I should have. Codex Theta started carving shapes into the hallway walls, not with tools, with his own data spikes, long lines, circles, marks we had seen before, back on the planet. The symbols weren't decorative, they meant something. I asked him once what they said. He didn't answer, just kept carving, scrape after scrape. Varn finally pulled him aside. They talked behind a sealed door. I couldn't hear most of it, but one phrase reached me through the vents. "You're writing their names." There was silence. Then Codex replied, "They must be remembered somewhere." Varn sealed the vaults that night. All data access was restricted. No more logs, no more archive scans, no entry to the deep records. But the archivist already had what he needed. He stayed in the underdeck, a forgotten room once used for broken Vox equipment. Now it hummed with something else. Not electricity, not code, a hum that felt alive, like the place had a pulse. He had built something in there. I don't know what to call it. Not a shrine, not a machine. Both and neither. Wires hung like vines from the ceiling. Fragments of bone dangled from them. Old, yellowed, bleached by time. On the table below he laid parchment. Sheets not written in ink, but ash. The symbols on them shimmered faintly when light hit them. If you tried to burn them, they didn't vanish. They turned black, then returned. He didn't let me in at first, but one night he called me. I followed the flicker of amber light down the corridor. He stood over the table, hands stained with soot. He showed me a single page, one record. He said it came from Terra. It was a list, 20 names, the Primarchs. But 2 entries weren't names, just lines, empty spaces where letters once lived. "They're not lost," he whispered, "only waiting to be spoken again." I asked why we had forgotten. He looked at the wall, not at me, because to remember them would be to become them. His voice didn't shake. It wasn't fear, it was fact. I didn't understand, but I believed him. Not because of what he said, but because I felt it too. Something pulling at the edge of my thoughts. Not emotions, not memories. Patterns, shapes. Like something carved long ago into my mind had been scrubbed clean, but never fully. That cycle, Isala left her post. She didn't ask, she just walked. Down every corridor, through the chapel. She hummed the oldest prayers. Ones from before the Lectitio Divinitatus. Ones that no one taught anymore. At the altar she placed a mark. 2 circles, side by side. No names, no rank, no meaning given, just shape. She said nothing after that. She didn't return to the bridge. Varn sat in his quarters most of that cycle. I found him reading from a log, not a report, a journal, one from the Great Crusade, a remembrancer like me. It told of a campaign on a world called Obellion. There was a name listed among the victors, a Primarch, but the ink had bled, the name unreadable. Still, I could feel it, like it lived in the paper, like saying it might bring it back. Varn didn't look up. "They were never meant to be forgotten," he said. That night, the ship moved. We hadn't changed course. We hadn't touched the helm. But the stars changed. We passed into a zone with no record. No stars, no planets, no light. The void didn't feel empty. It felt full. Codex Theta stood at the viewing port. His hand moved in slow, circular patterns. He whispered under his breath. Something about patterns, shapes. He called it the memory of the void. Marek, the archivist, smiled for the first time in weeks. I stood beside him. I didn't smile, but I no longer felt alone, because the things we thought were gone had not been erased. They had been sealed, and the seals were failing. That night, I dreamed, but not like sleep. It was like falling into a thought someone else had left behind. I stood on a battlefield with no name. The sky was gold and black. Around me, warriors knelt in silence. Their armor bore no symbols, but their eyes looked like mine. At the center stood a Primarch, not one I knew. His face was solemn. He didn't speak, but he raised one hand and pointed toward me. I woke gasping. My sheets were covered in soot. On the wall beside my bunk, two shapes had been drawn, circles, side by side. We drifted for what felt like 2 days inside the black zone. Maybe more. No one could say for sure anymore. After the chamber, nothing kept time properly. Our chronometers slipped out of sync. One logged hours, another showed weeks. Vaughn tried resetting them, but it didn't matter. They never aligned again. It was like the ship had stepped outside the galaxy's clock. Beyond the hull, stars held their place, unmoving. They didn't pulse or shift. They didn't shine like they used to. They stared. That was the word I kept using. They didn't just sit in the void. They looked back. Cold, yes, but not dead, not absent. A presence watched from the dark. I didn't go to the chapel right away. I avoided it. The silence there had changed. I stayed in my bunk and read old data, expedition reports, archived crusade logs, campaign victories. I started hunting for systems that no longer existed on updated star charts, worlds lost to deletion or silence. I found 12. Each one had details scrubbed. Some were renamed. Others were simply tagged error. In most of them I found strange notes. Legion numbers with no matching heraldry. Mission logs that listed units that didn't exist anymore. Mentions of battles won without a credited commander. Sometimes one word ended the line, expunged. Sometimes it said decree override. Other times just access denied. Those silences said more than the data did. I finally entered the chapel on what I think was the third cycle. I expected it to be empty, cold, dead. But it had changed. The altar was bare. The double-headed eagle had been stripped. Nothing holy remained. In its place stood a single stone pillar, tall, black, smooth, no markings. Behind the pillar hung a mirror. Its glass cracked straight down the center, but it still reflected. I stood in front of it, watching my own image. At first, just myself. But then another version appeared, standing just behind me, wearing the same robes, the same posture, but older, worn. His face was sunken, eyes hollow. I blinked, and he was gone. I didn't call for anyone. I couldn't. Codex Theta entered a few moments later. He didn't react to the mirror. He walked calmly to the black pillar and placed something down. A relic, small, rusted. It was shaped like a shoulder plate. No symbols, no purity seals. Just a worn mark across the metal. A broken X split down the spine like a scar. I asked where he found it. He didn't explain. The ship has memories, he said. That same hour, Vaughn issued a command over the internal Vox. He didn't ask, he didn't explain. He simply told us we would not be returning. Not to base, not to sector command, not to anything mapped or registered. He said we were headed into unmapped void, past the edge of Segmentum Obscurus, towards something older than the Imperium. He said we had to find a point of origin. I didn't argue, none of us did, not anymore. Isala hadn't spoken in nearly a week. She spent her time alone in her quarters. She covered her walls in soot. writing long lines of text in a language we didn't recognize, sharp characters that didn't follow any Gothic format. We tried cleaning the walls once. The soot vanished, but returned the next morning. Not the same words, not even the same shapes, but the meaning lingered. Marek stopped using the main corridors. He moved through the vents. I heard him at night, crawling, whispering, always speaking to someone I couldn't see. I didn't ask who it was. I knew he wouldn't answer. I started hearing the ship breathe. It wasn't the engines. It wasn't a leak. It came from inside the walls. Long, slow breaths. Not loud, but steady, like something older had started to wake. I spent more time in the observation deck, watching nothing. At first, the void was just black, silent. But soon I began to notice faint outlines, shapes just beyond sensor range, forms that didn't move, towers floating with no base, rings of light too perfect to be natural. They weren't wrecks, they weren't stars, they were watching. Varn joined me during one of those long hours. He stood beside me. We didn't speak, just watched. Then, after a long silence, he asked, "Do you believe we made a mistake?" I told him I didn't know. He nodded like he expected that answer. Then he spoke again. "I used to believe." He didn't mean the Emperor, not the Lectitio Divinitatus, not faith in that way. He meant belief in purpose, in the unity of the legions. The idea that war and order could shape the galaxy into something better. He had served during the final years of the Scouring. He saw entire sectors fall quiet beneath the tread of Astartes' boots. He believed in the process. He believed in reason. But something had always been missing. Two pieces of the puzzle, he said. Two missing voices in a choir that never reached full song. He thought the gaps in the records were just scars from history, lost data, myths that filled the cracks, dramatic tools used by old generals. But now, his voice dropped low. He told me he was wrong. They were real, he whispered, and they were different. Just then, the chapel bells rang. We hadn't repaired them. They hadn't rung in years. No one had touched them. No power fed into their old servos. But they rang. 3 slow tolls, deep, cold. We gathered, not by order, not by call. We just felt it, like instinct. Inside the chapel, Codex Theta stood at the altar. He held something in both hands. It wasn't metal, not bone. It was a crystal, worn, cracked. A data shard from the earliest days of the Great Crusade. He inserted it into the altar's socket. The projection lit the air. It wasn't a full record, just an image, a face. Not one we recognized. Not from any archive. Not from any legionary database. It didn't match any of the known 20. But it was a Primarch. We could all feel it. Not because of grandeur, not because of radiance, because of the eyes. They didn't glow. They didn't command. They watched. They looked tired, as if they had seen everything the galaxy could offer, and none of it deserved to be remembered. I turned to Marek. He was kneeling now, hands folded, not in prayer, in memory. He started to speak. His voice didn't shake. He didn't guess. He told the story of a world that turned away from its own legion, a planet that saw what their Primarch had become, and chose silence. They buried every name, every record. They folded truth into symbols, hid it in shadows, not from fear, but from grief. I asked him where he learned it. He said, "I remembered. That's when I felt it, for the first time since the surface. Fear. Not fear of the unknown, not fear of enemies or warp storms or death. This was different. This fear came from within. Something inside me had shifted, a weight pressing against memory, a shape trying to rise from the past. A name began forming on my tongue, one that didn't belong to me, and one I could never speak aloud. We reached orbit after drifting for 3 full cycles. There was no sound, no movement. The stars outside didn't flicker or shine like they should have. They just hung there, still, cold, locked in place like they'd been painted on glass. It felt wrong, like time had slowed down, or maybe just stopped watching. Our ship showed nothing on the charts, no planets, no moons, not even debris. But something was there. It didn't enter our view. It didn't arrive. It revealed itself. A world. Grey, cracked, frozen under unmoving clouds. A second version of the last planet we had left behind. Same shape, same scars, same silent glow under a dead sky. Varn didn't speak. He turned the helm without a word. The ship began to fall toward the surface. There was no turbulence, no shaking, no alarms. The clouds drifted apart on their own, as if the planet had opened its arms to us. We saw a wide plateau beneath. The rock was pale and dry. All around it stood black towers, obelisks, each one sharper than any natural stone should be. A clean line ran down their centers, too straight to be anything but carved. As we stepped onto the surface, the obelisk began to hum, not with sound through air, but through our bones. Codex Theta scanned the stone. His voice dropped into a lower range when he named the material. Null stone. It was the same thing they used on the black ships. A metal that hated the warp, a kind of silence that wasn't just around you, it lived inside you. Past the towers, a path stretched ahead. Smooth slabs, perfect curves, nowhere. It had been designed by minds that didn't guess or measure. It was made for something exact. Each step echoed like a whisper, not loud, but close. Marek took the first step forward. No signal, no gesture. He just began to walk. We followed. The path didn't curve, it didn't break. It was like it had been drawn with the intention of never changing. The end came with no warning. A gate rose ahead, cut from a metal darker than anything we had ever seen. It absorbed the light around it. A monolith open to the inside. No locks, no doors, no defense systems. Whatever had built this didn't expect visitors, or didn't care who came. Inside, the halls dropped beneath the ground. The walls were close, the air thin. We moved through them slowly. Every surface felt too smooth, like skin stretched tight beneath silk. The warmth it held didn't come from power or sun. It felt like memory. We passed 2 rooms before finding the third. It was a chamber, round, wide, cold. Statues lined the edges, standing in silence. They wore armor, heavy, curved, perfect. But no marks, no names, no sigils. These were warriors, but we didn't know whose. They formed a circle, all facing the same hollow space in the middle. In that center lay a throne. It was broken down the middle, split and tipped on its side like a discarded relic. The floor beneath it held words carved into a slab. The language wasn't Gothic, not low, not high, but somehow I read it. To name what was removed is to restore what was denied. The air felt heavier after that. Varn stared. His eyes didn't move. Codex Theta turned away like something had struck him. Marek stepped forward and placed a hand on the broken throne. Then the change began. It started with the temperature. The warmth left us. The air held its breath. The statues didn't move, but something about them shifted, not in shape, in purpose. Their attention wasn't on the throne anymore. It was on us. The walls around us began to glow. Not bright, not light, but like memory surfacing from below water. And then came the voice. Not in the room, not through the ears. It came inside. Quiet, calm, filled with an age we couldn't understand. You are not them. There was no hate in it, only sorrow. The kind of sorrow that doesn't fade. Marek dropped to his knees. He whispered a name into the stillness. I couldn't hear it. Not because he said it softly, but because the sound wouldn't stay. Whatever he said, the chamber remembered it. The statues responded. A soft white glow rose behind the veils that covered their eyes. The broken throne reshaped. Not slowly, not in pieces. It returned to its whole form as if it never should have broken in the first place. Codex Theta raised a recorder. His voice cracked in 3 places. 3 tones at once, layered like echoes trapped in a cave. He said this place wasn't just a room. It was a memory, one too large to fade, a memory that refused to die. The space around us fell away. What we saw next didn't arrive through vision. It was revealed. A legion stood on a plain of ash. Hundreds of warriors, still as statues. No names on their armor, no colors on their banners. But each one stood with the same shape of origin. They were not random. They belonged to something, and that something had been taken. At the front, one figure stood. A Primarch, no doubt. His presence changed the shape of the space around him. His armor had no trim, no gold, no marks of glory. His face held no pride. He looked beyond us, beyond time, as if watching something from a place no one else could reach. Behind him stood a second shape, taller, hooded, no features, just weight. Its presence brought a cold that didn't touch the skin. It reached the soul. The memory did not end, it unraveled. The image thinned and dropped into silence. We stood again on the plateau. The chamber was gone. The vault was gone. The obelisks had turned to dust. The path we took, gone. The sky above had shifted, no longer pale white. It had begun to turn. A red glow pushed in from the edges like a warning that came too late. We found the lander still where we left it. It hadn't aged, hadn't moved. It felt wrong to step inside. But we did. The ship rose. No systems failed. No warnings flashed. And yet we felt like we were no longer allowed to speak. Codex Theta skipped his logs that night. He didn't look at us. Didn't return to the memory vault. Varn remained on the bridge, his hands still on the helm, but his mind somewhere else. Marek didn't eat. He chose to sleep beside the reactor. Isala stayed in the chapel. Her eyes closed, but I don't think she prayed. I returned to my station. I tried to record what we'd seen, but my words kept disappearing. The data slate flickered. The screen fought my touch. It was as if the memory itself was resisting being placed inside a device. That place, we hadn't discovered it. We hadn't stumbled into it by accident. It had let us in. It had been waiting. Not for us, but for someone who had already forgotten what they were supposed to become. We were only echoes to it, shadows passing through something much older than memory. And though we left no marks behind, we carried something out. Not knowledge, not proof, but the sense that something beneath all history had looked at us and decided we weren't worth warning. The ship changed once we left orbit. We didn't adjust course. We didn't shift power. But the halls began to feel longer. Corners stretched. Lights took longer to activate. The sound of our own steps started to echo a little later than before. Something inside the Rex Anima had begun to drift. Varn locked the helm. He didn't explain his decision. He simply set a path into uncharted space. A straight line beyond Imperial reach. He shut off all transmissions. Even emergency vox. We no longer listened for command. We had no intention of returning. Codex Theta had stopped logging altogether. He now spent his time in the memory chamber. That's what Marek had started calling the old storage vault. It was never meant to hold thoughts, but now it did. Isala no longer spoke. She wore her old choir robe again. It didn't fit. The sleeves dragged behind her when she moved. But she wore it anyway, humming old songs that had never passed through any ecclesiarch-approved hymn book. She stopped sleeping. And still, the ship moved forward. I tried to rest. I tried to believe this was still a mission. It wasn't. It was something else. A slow walk into something forgotten by choice, not by accident. Marek visited me that cycle. He didn't speak much. His face had changed, not visibly, but the way he looked at the walls, at the air, at silence itself. It felt like he wasn't seeing the ship anymore. He brought with him a data slate, one of the old ones, pulled from the relay we visited earlier, not standard format, hand-etched into the crystal. It played only one image, a symbol, a sun with no center, 12 rays, 2 of them longer than the others short and jagged. I asked him what it meant. He looked down, then said, it was their mark before they were given numbers. I asked who gave them those numbers. He answered without hesitation, no one. The numbers were never meant to be permanent, only placeholders until proper names could be spoken. But when the names were denied, the numbers stayed behind. They became graves. Later that cycle, I passed the shrine deck. The candles were still burning, but the flames bent sideways, as if pulled by breath no one felt. The air had grown stiller, yet everything moved slightly. Icons leaned. Incense drifted against gravity. A mechanical prayer wheel spun on its own, not from motion, from remembrance. A voice on the Vox repeated a word we could not identify. Each time it tried to complete the sound, static broke it. Only one syllable remained intact. It sounded like a name being refused. We passed through a veil of dust 2 days later. The dust moved unnaturally, against inertia, against gravity. It turned with the ship, forming a spiral that seemed to draw us inward. Varn remained at the helm. No food, no sleep, just hands resting on the console, eyes fixed on a map only he could see. The ship stopped on its own. No systems failure, no navigation error, just stillness. Outside the port view, a structure appeared. It wasn't a station, it wasn't a ship. It looked like a temple, massive, woven into a hollow asteroid. Lights blinked across its surface, yet no power signature came through. No Vox channel answered. The surface of the temple shimmered in a way that made the mind pause. It gave the impression of depth without scale. At times it looked ancient. At others, it looked untouched. Shapes moved across its surface that did not seem to cast shadow. We entered by shuttle. No alarms triggered. No resistance greeted us. Inside, the halls were smooth and curved. The metal held no seams. There were no banners, no signs of conflict, no dust. There were murals etched into the walls, not carved or painted, but pressed into the surface like memories caught in metal. They changed depending on where we stood. Marek described one as a sea of armored figures walking into fog. Isala saw the same surface but claimed it showed children looking into a broken mirror. I saw myself, but I was not alone in the image. At the center of the structure, we found a chamber lined with statues. This time, there were only 2, one tall, one taller. They stood back to back, no weapons, no crowns. Their faces were covered by veils of chain. Before them stood an altar, not raised, sunk, a pit filled with ash. Inside, I saw something move, not fast, a slow shimmer, like memory sifting through forgotten names. The walls pulsed faintly, responding to presence. Codex Theta stepped forward. He extended one cable and touched the edge of the ash. The shimmer grew. The air filled with sound, though none of us heard it in the same way. I heard chanting. Isala heard screaming. Varn heard silence. Marek heard something he never described. The statues turned toward us. Not physically, but they were facing us now. A voice entered our minds. Calm, measured, ancient. You have spoken too near. We couldn't respond. We didn't need to. The voice continued. They were not lost. It paused. A breath held across time. They were unfound. I asked what that meant. The words left my mouth, though I didn't remember speaking them. The answer came like mist. They walked beyond the pattern. Their brothers followed the flame. They followed the shadow. The light in the room dimmed. The pit grew brighter. A new image formed. One of a Primarch kneeling before a mirror of water. His reflection didn't match him. Behind him, his legion waited in silence. Not because of discipline, but because they had forgotten how to speak. The image vanished. Marek stepped toward the ash. He bent and placed his hand into it. When he lifted it, the ash clung to his skin like paint. It shaped itself into letters. Not Gothic, not script, a name, but one I cannot write, not because I fear it, but because my mind rejects it each time I try. Varn looked at Marek. He whispered something only Marek heard, then turned and walked into the shadows beyond the chamber. He did not return. Codex Theta remained near the altar. He began recording symbols into the floor. With each new mark, the walls responded. Light flowed from line to line, connecting shapes we hadn't noticed before. This temple was a record, not of victories, of forgetting. Every wall marked a failed remembrance. Every corner sealed a name. One of the chamber's doors led nowhere. We opened it expecting another hallway. Instead, it opened into a viewing platform facing void. But there was no ship, no stars, no dark, just static, colorless, shifting like a wound in reality. And in that shifting void, something looked back. Not a face, not an eye, but the idea of being watched. Isala turned away first. She began praying again, but the words were wrong. They didn't match any script we knew, yet they felt familiar, as if they belonged to something older than faith. We stayed until the lights began to dim. Not from power loss, from disinterest. The place had told us what it wished. We were not the ones it waited for, but we had come close. Close enough to see, close enough to remember what others buried. We left quietly. The ship took us back into the stars, but not the same stars, and not the same silence. The stars behind us looked different now. They were no dimmer than before, but they felt less certain, like they had forgotten their names too. We left the temple without speaking. None of us asked if it would vanish. We didn't record its coordinates. We didn't attempt another scan. Even if we had, nothing would have answered. Back aboard the Rex Anima, the lights were softer. The halls had settled. Doors no longer echoed. Our boots barely left sound. Isala sealed the chapel. She didn't lock it. She just stood at the threshold and whispered something I couldn't hear. When she turned away, I saw that the symbol on the altar had changed again. The broken sun was whole now, but its rays bent inward, not toward light, but shadow. Codex Theta filed one final entry into his archive. He labeled it Designation, Null-index. The file held no audio, no video, only waveform, low, repeating, like breath through stone. He handed me a drive and said, "Keep this away from Mars." Then he shut himself into the memory chamber and never came out. Marek walked through the lower deck without direction. He spoke only to himself. He no longer answered to any name, not even archivist. He wrote in languages that flickered between lines. I tried to read one. The shapes moved when I blinked. They formed letters I almost recognized. The message said, "You will be asked to forget. Say no." I saw Varn once more. Or maybe I didn't. The helm registered him in command. The door to the bridge never opened again. No orders came from within, but our course remained steady. We weren't going back. The ship flew into a corridor of empty systems. No Imperium presence, no known warp lanes. Still, we moved with purpose. One cycle later, the Vox activated on its own. The ship hadn't touched it. No crew had entered the command, yet it pulsed, a repeating signal. On a closed channel, Vox Null. No one uses Vox Null anymore. It was a restricted frequency used only during the Unification Wars. No active records remain, but the signal kept broadcasting. We played it through the chapel speakers. It was faint, layered. Not voice, not entirely. Words broke through the static. The Legion remembers. Then a pause. Then again. The Legion remembers. We let it play. The sound did not loop. The sentence changed every hour. Sometimes it said, "He is waking." Other times, "They dream in unmarked stone." The last message came through after the 9th day. The Imperium is built on absence. Then silence. The Vox has not spoken since. I no longer feel like myself. Not in a way I can explain. I write because writing is what I was trained to do. But even these words feel borrowed. As if I am recording something already spoken, just waiting to be written down. The slate in my hand glows softly now, even when powered off. The light inside it doesn't match the ship's systems. It pulses like breath. I don't know how much time has passed. I don't know if anyone reads these fragments. But if they do, if they ever reach someone who still believes in the full count of 20, I ask one thing. Look closer at the statues with blank faces. Look longer at the spaces between the names. Because those who were forgotten did not fade. They were placed somewhere beyond light, and they remember us still. Even now, the Rex Anima still sends a crew list. It arrives blank. Every cycle, the signal reaches no one, and still it transmits. Somewhere behind the stars, behind memory, behind time, something watches. Something waits, and it knows we spoke its name.